teaching artist with Metal Arts, a nonprofit out of Twist, Washington. Today, we get to paint on newspaper, and we get to paint birds. So this is a robin painted on newspaper with your watercolors, and we also outline it with a permanent marker, or you could use color pencils or a crayon. Optionally, you can choose to glue it onto a different color paper for a background. So this video has the robin in part 1. If you'd like to stick around for part 2 and watch a second video, that will be a mountain bluebird. So the mountain bluebird is part 2. The robin is part 1. Go ahead and gather your materials and we'll get started. Okay, so here's my piece of newspaper. I want to have a smaller section, and I don't want to use this side because it has photographs on it. I'd rather just have words and not pictures. So it's easy to have a nice edge if your newspaper is this way by tearing the side. Just like that. It makes a nice rough edge. You can do it on both sides. So you're tearing the long ways. And then you'll notice that you can't really tear it the other direction without ripping it. So it's nice to have a ruler or something hard and flat that you can push down on, and then do this, and then you get a nice clean torn edge. You could also just use scissors and cut your newspaper, but right now I'm just going to tear off kind of the bottom and tops of a couple pieces. They don't have to be perfectly square. I'm just kind of getting rid of the original edges, and then I have a couple of pieces that look kind of hand torn, but they're not ripped, that I can use to work with. And then you can decide if you want to orientate it with your words up or down. Make sure the pictures are hopefully on the other side. So once you have some kind of newspaper torn to the size that you want, then we'll get our permanent marker or black crayon and our watercolors out. Okay, so I have my newspaper, I have my watercolors handy, and my water glass, paintbrush, napkin, and I'm going to use a Sharpie to draw my bird. You could also use a black crayon or colored pencil. You just don't want to use regular markers because they'll when they get wet, they'll bleed into your watercolors. So, something to draw with, and we are going to just go ahead and draw with a Sharpie. We'll do a robin, and we'll start somewhere up here in this area, so further up than half and a little bit over, and we'll draw a little curve like this. This will be the top of the head. And then we'll draw a beak with a triangle and then a reverse triangle. And then we'll draw another little part of the beak. We're going to be putting a worm in its mouth, right? And then we'll come down a little bit. And then we'll just kind of do a little squiggly line. This is kind of defining its head shape. And then robins have an eye, and then they have this like kind of white band around their eye. So we just kind of want to draw a double line there so we can leave part of it white. And then we're just going to come down here and Make a nice big curve. This robin has had a lot of worms to eat, so a nice big belly for our robin. And then we're going to come here and go down and out and then curve it around. This is the wing. So down, back, and then match it up. This line, we can just kind of do a little squiggle line and match it. And then we need its tail feathers. So something like that. And our robin is in the grass hunting for worms, so she needs some legs. So we'll draw a little bit of a leg here. And her feet's going to be kind of in the grass, so we're not going to worry about where her feet really end up. But we do need to have 2 legs holding her up. And then we do need a worm. So somewhere out of this beak, I'm just going to snake a worm back into her beak, and it's going to like hang out below the beak there. It's like a little mini snake, right? Little worm shape. And then down here by the feet, we're just going to do some grass lines. Just to give the hint, we'll be painting this. And what else? Oh, let's put a couple lines in her wings also. Okay, so we have our robin. I'm going to put my Sharpie away. If that was too fast for you, you can pause or go back. And now we're going to get into watercoloring this robin. So when you paint with newsprint, it's nice to make sure you have something underneath. If it's just a hard table surface, it might get so wet it sticks to your table. So you can stick another piece of paper under this. I have this kind of matte, so I don't need to on mine. But another piece of paper or another piece of newsprint under that will really help. Okay, so I'm going to get my brush wet. And I know that robins have this kind of orangey breast. So I'm going to use my orange, and I'm getting it wet enough to paint with, but I'm not going to get it super soupy watercolory. Just enough to where I can really get paint. Because I want to make this the most vibrant paint I can. And with newsprint, you need to paint kind of fast. If you spend too much time in one area, it could get a hole in your paper. So we're just gentle and we're just stroking it on quickly. So I had orange on my brush. I'm going to rinse my brush out. Now I'm going to use yellow for the beak. So I'm going to go ahead and paint my beak. And rinse my brush. And now I'm going to use a little bit of red. Just a little bit. I'm not getting a lot on my brush for my worm. And that was really light, so guess what? I can go back over it. There's my worm. It's really fun painting with watercolors on newsprint because you can see all the words. It makes like extra texture on your art. Okay, so the head, the wings, the tail feathers, the legs are all going to be kind of a black gray. If it's too black, we won't see our lines. So a little bit will do ya with the black. So I'm putting my brush in, then I'm kind of tapping it off a little bit. And let's go ahead and do the wing first. See how dark that is? That's too dark, so I can just get some of that paint off my brush. And I'll just pull that paint back around with my wet brush. So that'll show you. You don't need a lot of paint. You can just barely use the side of your black, or you can mix in the lid of your watercolor tray. You can dilute your black with extra water just to thin it down and then stick your brush in there. So I'm painting pretty quick. Around my eyeball. I'm going to try to leave that white spot around my eye. And then right in the middle of my eye, I'm going to very carefully just add a little black there. So now my bird is pretty much painted. I'm going to rinse my brush out. I'm going to go for the green for my grass. This is pretty quick. You can't spend a lot of time painting on newspaper because it'll get too wet. So I'm just doing green and I'm doing little strokes, like little tick marks for my grass. It looks like she's in a nice lush patch of grass where she caught her worm. And it kind of hides where her feet are, right? Her feet are buried in that grass. Okay. So we've quickly painted our bird, some little grass patterns. You can do something in the background if you want. You don't have to. You could even paint just like a little frame line with a certain color. I'm going to put a little bit of yellow in my background because I think it's a sunny day where my robin is. So I'm getting yellow and I'm just doing a quick background wash. I like the words. I don't want to cover up all the words, but I just want to add a little brightness to the top of this. And it helps kind of balance it out because I have color down here, having a little bit of color up there is also nice. And I'm going to leave a pretty good space around my bird. You can see you can tell when your paper is too wet, it just doesn't want to take that paint anymore. So here is your robin catching a worm on newsprint masterpiece. So if you wanted to take this a step further, what you would do is you would let this dry. You let it dry, it doesn't take very long, and then you can get a piece of like paper bag you can cut up, or a piece of colored construction paper, and you can put your painting on that and it makes a kind of nice frame for it. And then you would just use a glue stick to glue the back of that and glue it down. Mine's wet right now, so I'm not going to do that, but I will show you one that is glued down. So this one's finished. I glued it down, and then what I did was I glued it down, and then I put another piece of paper on top of it, and then I set a book on it to make it nice and flat. And I just left it on there for a couple hours, and then it made my crinkly watercolor newsprint lay down nice and flat, and it's a final piece. So if you choose to take this and add a border, you can pick different color and do that. So that's a quick watercolor robin on newsprint catching a worm. Right? I really enjoyed painting with you today, and if you'd like to learn how to paint another bird, I will do another video where we show how to paint a mountain bluebird. Have a great day. Okay, here are the steps to paint a mountain bluebird. So this is what we're going to be painting on newspaper. So I have a piece of newspaper, and I took care to make sure that the pictures are not on the side I'm going to paint on. I just want words and no newspaper pictures. And I'm going to use a Sharpie again. You can use crayon, colored pencil, but not regular pens that will run when we do our watercolors. I also have my watercolors out, but first we're going to draw our bluebird. So at any point, if I go too fast, feel free to pause. My bluebird's going to be sitting on a post, so I'm going to draw her head somewhere above the half mark up here, kind of towards the middle, and I'm going to draw a little curve like that for the top of her head. Her beak is a sharp little triangle like that, and then we'll just put a little line so it's going back into her head. Then right under her beak, we'll draw a gentle curve down like this. So she's looking this way, and this will be where her legs are. Right here, we'll put a couple lines for her legs sticking out. We'll just make a hint of a foot. All right, and then we'll come back up. We'll do her eye. Her eye somewhere around here. Little eye. And then she has this little kind of different color feathers right by her eye. So I'm going to make a little spot to put that color. And then I'm going to come down a little bit and then back up. We're going to be working back here on her wings, down and back up. Then I'm going to come in a little bit, down and back up. And then at the point of this one, this is kind of where her tail feathers all start. So I'm going to come here and just come down and up, and then I'm going to come down and back. This one's going to be darker. This is kind of where her more blue feathers are. And then make another double line up, and then we'll just connect it to her legs. So she's sitting pretty upright, paying attention that way. We've got some feather action happening here, and now we've got to figure out what is she standing on. So from the foot here, I'm just going to go out and make an oval shape. She's standing on top of an oval fence post in my picture. Maybe yours is square. And then I'm just going to draw a line down and a line down. And then my fence post is going to have barbed wire because it's going to go to another fence post somewhere out of the picture. So I'll put a little hook there and a little hook there, and we'll just put a hint of a barbed wire fence, some X's, just a line and an X, you know, those little barbs sticking out of our fence. So that's a super quick sketch that we're going to do for the bird and fence posts. Now we'll put our Sharpie away, and we'll get our brush and our watercolors out, and we'll get our blue just wet enough to paint with. When you paint on newsprint, you want it not to be too wet, and if you're painting on a hard countertop, you might actually want to stick a piece of paper underneath to help absorb the water because newsprint is so thin. I'm painting on a thick mat, so I am going to just stick with what I have, but you can put another piece of newspaper or piece of paper under there. So I'm going to paint her head blue and her feathers. She's really blue, or he's really blue, on the back part here. And I'm going to leave the belly alone for just a minute in this back feather, because once you have some blue here, you're just going to dip your brush in water, kind of tap it off. I'm just trying to get rid of some of my blue so I have a lighter shade to work with right here. See, that's lighter, that's darker. If it's the same, you can come back with the blue and just kind of darken up your blue. So we have a light blue, dark blue, and I'm going to barely dip my tip of my brush in the water and use my tip barely to get some black. I'm just going to go to the edge of my black. I'm not going into the main part. I'm just kind of coming on the edge here. And I'm going to paint this back feather and just give a little darkness to this back one because it's kind of in the shadow here. And right here he has a little gray. And then the beak and the eye and the legs. So there's our bluebird. Rinse my brush off. I'm going to go for brown. Same thing, we're not gonna get it really soupy. We're going to get as much of that pigment on our brush as we can. And we'll just paint this way. And then we'll paint down and over. Our post is round. You might want to put some round marks. And while my paint's still wet, I'm going to just barely get some black on there and add some black to the top of my post because that's in the shade under the bird. Make it a little darker. All right, I'm gonna let that dry. It's pretty wet, but I might come back and touch it up a little bit. Okay, so rinse my brush out really good. And now I'm going to use my yellow and I'm going to just find my sky. It brings some color up. And I think my bird's happy because it's sunrise. Or maybe it's sunset. You can decide. So I'm going to do some yellow. And then once I get down a little ways here, see, I'm being pretty quick and messy. It's okay to be quick and messy with this because it's part of the style. Now I'm going to get some orange on my brush. And I'm going to bring some orange up into my yellow, over here, over here. If it's too orange for you, you can always go back into your yellow. Go over it. And then we'll kind of soften where the orange and yellow meet. And then it looks like maybe there's a sunset happening, or sunrise. So we have our Mountain Bluebird, and as it dries, your paper is going to crinkle a little bit. So let it dry. It's okay if it crinkles. And then you're going to take your dry piece of art, and if you want to use a piece of like paper bag, or maybe you have some construction paper, you can, once it's dry, use a glue stick and glue it on to some paper. This is how blue would look with the Mountain Bluebird. This is how brown looks when it's dry. And then once I have it glued down on, it still wants to be a little crinkly. So I just cover it with a piece of paper, and then I put a heavy book on top and let it sit for an hour or two. And then it'll dry nice and flat like this one. It's not crinkly at all. And then don't forget to sign your art. Put the date and your signature. And then you have a Mountain Bluebird sitting on a fence post. And and I had a great time painting with you. I hope you enjoy exploring painting on newsprint. There's all kinds of things you can do. So have a great day and have fun exploring.